issues like
Okay, great. Welcome back. We'll move on to item 6. Oh, I'm sorry. With regards to item 5, which was the closed session, Does the committee agree to note the attached pooled funds review? Noted. Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Moving on to item 6, draft Treasury Management Strategy for 2024-25. I will ask Sue to introduce this. In a minute. I just wanted to say this is for us to ultimately to note, but to pass any questions or comments on for full council.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is the Treasury Management Strategy for 24-25, and obviously there's 2 reports here this evening. This report purely relates to the Treasury Management investments only. Investments held for service purposes or for commercial gain, such as the investment property, are considered as part of the separate capital investment strategy report, which we will come on to. Additionally, it's important that we obviously set out and update each year our Treasury Management Policy Statement, as well as the Treasury Management Strategy itself, and remembering that this sets the frameworks and limits for the delivery of the Council's Treasury Management Strategy. Worth noting, of course, as always, the report has been produced in accordance with the Treasury Management in Public Services Code of Practice, which was issued in 2017 and revised in 2021, otherwise known as the CIPFA Code. Obviously, the Treasury Management Strategy is one of a number of strategies that together set out how the Council will manage its resources and investments. The other strategies include the Capital Investment Strategy, which is on this agenda, which also includes the Investment Strategy non-Treasury and the Property Investment Strategy, which we'll come on to and pick up as part of the annual property plan activity. Again, although we've discussed this evening, the Treasury Management Strategy sets the overall limits and parameters within which the operational activity is delivered, and it operates as such to give us sufficient flexibility to be able to meet operational change in the delivery of strategy during the coming year. And whilst the strategy sets the absolute limits, it doesn't set the asset allocation. That actually, as you know, is delegated to me as Section 151 officer to choose the specific investments within the Treasury Management Strategy. And a reminder again that any significant changes in the strategy in year would have to go back to Council for approval. So I can't change the strategy during the year, but I need to operate within the strategy. And I think it's worth noting that obviously the Treasury Management Strategy, and more specifically the second paper on the Capital Investment Strategy, it contains the information that supports the MTFS and Capital Programme update that will be going to Cabinet and Council in February. And it's just reflecting what those, which is a separate suite of decisions and discussions. This is merely reflecting what that looks like in terms of those papers. So what I would say is there's limited change to the previous strategy, but obviously from previous discussion with committee, and a strong recommendation to have an independent independent assessment of our Treasury management activities. I have added in that we will do no longer than 5 years apart. We will actually do an independent assessment. But I would point out that obviously if we're doing something significantly different in our strategy, or we want to change our strategy, we would of course look to get another independent advice as well at the same time. So it will be no more than 5 years apart, but it genuinely could end up being, next year if we chose to change our entire strategy. So in terms of the Treasury Management Strategy itself, obviously it gives the background and context of the strategy. It looks at the interest rate forecasts. It gives the details of our current investment portfolio and our risk management assessment. It looks at the Treasury Management Prudential Indicators, gives the strategy itself. It looks at borrowing. It looks at our investment performance monitoring and reporting. It notes that obviously officers and members should have training, and we've talked before about making sure that an appropriate session is set up for yourselves prior to one of the Treasury Management meetings this year. And of course the use of external consultants and Treasury advisors. So that was all I was going to say about it, because as I say, it's an update of the previous strategy with only one minor change, and I'm happy to take any questions on it.
Councillor Atkin, I'll come to you in a second. I just wanted to just check that there's a lot of strategies here. The way they cascade and fit together takes a bit of getting your head around sometimes. So there's no such thing as dumb questions. So if you're not sure, please ask. There's quite a useful table. Struggling to remember what page it's on. I think it might be.
It's on page 76.
Thank you, Sue. Page 76. It just sets out how all these strategies sort of fit together. I will take questions. Councillor Rattigan, you were first, I think.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sue, for the report. You're taking somebody to the Cabinet. Is there any recommended changes to them? I haven't read the Cabinet papers, it only came out this morning, not this afternoon. Thank you. That's perfect. If we move now to your comments about a 5-year review, I don't feel particularly comfortable with 5 years written in there. I know you say no longer than 5 years. I'd like something perhaps mandated for 2 years. And of course, we could review it more fully if Liz Truss gets back to being PM again. I see a little political point there. I do think if 5 years seems too long, and we all know that changes of administration, changes of leader sometimes happen, and therefore, if we mandated it for 2 years, I think I would feel more comfortable with that, and I don't know how the rest of the committee feel about that.
I don't know if anyone else has a view on that. Councillor Phillimore.
I tend to agree. I mean, 5 years is better than what we've had in the past, but 2 years would be good. Another political point.
I'm of the view that 5 years is probably too long. I mean, I'd probably settle for 3, but 2 is fine as well. I have a related point with this as well, that it's the appointment of an independent review, you know, this committee is established to oversee the governance and scrutiny of our investment policies, I think that a second advisor, if it's going to benchmark or look at decisions of or advice of Arlene Close and the Section 151 officer, then I would be much more comfortable if that advisor was appointed by this committee. I don't know what other people feel about that. I'd like to see councillors' views on that first.
There's a specific point in that the committee cannot appoint contractors to undertake work on behalf of the council. We
can select, and then you can appoint.
No, it's not. It would be in contravention of our contract standing orders.
A contravention of what? Our contract standing orders. Aren't they being reviewed and brought forward again soon? So couldn't we amend those?
It's based on my recommendation, and obviously within the Constitution, the committees don't have the ability to seek to appoint contractors to undertake activity. This would be this is an appropriate activity for the 151 officer to select an appropriate independent advisor.
I just think that it looks to me like marking your own homework. Sorry. I would welcome the views of other councillors.
Sorry, so I've given my view,
Faulkner.
obviously, as 151 officer, but clearly there's something stopping you from making that recommendation to council.
Thank you. Councillor Faulkner.
I was just going to maybe suggest we ask our independent advisor.
That's a great idea. What do you think, Richard?
It would be very unusual for committees to make appointments for contractors. It's usual for the documentation how you do it, but it would be very unusual to do that.
Thank you. Sage words as always. So let's park that one for now. Let's go back to the 5 years. We have an opportunity to comment in the paper, comments that go to full council. Is the committee happy to take forward the 5-year review, or is there a majority that wants a shorter period? And if so, what period is this committee going to recommend?
Yeah, I propose 2 years, but obviously I'm happy to listen to my colleagues.
Councillor Phillimore.
I'm supportive of 2 years.
Councillor Faulkner.
I'd stick either with 5 or 3.
Okay. Richard.
Is it not possible to find a more flexible set of words? Because 2 years may be totally inappropriate. 5 years, I think, is rather long, I have to say, in the way things are currently. But there ought to be something that triggers an external review, even outside having a regular. So if you said every 2 years, you could say, I suppose, you should have a discussion about whether you need a review in the 2-year period. But then a year later, you might desperately need a review. So you need to be a bit open, having some flexibility, so you can bring it in an independent review when you actually need it.
Sue.
Hence the reason why it says no more than 5 years, because of the fact that it's, if we were to completely change our strategy next year, we would want to get an independent review. So it's not that we're saying it will only ever be every 5 years. It's just that if a circumstance doesn't arise that requires that independent assessment, we would undertake one anyway every 5 years. Because I would ask the committee in terms of what value it's adding over and above the independent advice we're already getting from our Treasury Management Advisor. The last time we took on a second advisor was because there was a very specific addition, £90 million that was being taken out of the Treasury Management current strategy and being invested completely differently, and that was the reason for getting the independent advisor to come in and actually give that support and advice. So it was for a very specific reason, and they continue to only look at those particular investments. So it's not that we've had it before and we've had it taken away. That was very much for a specific Treasury management activity.
Councillor Isaac.
I listened to the various arguments, and I think Richard's right about making sure there is some flexibility in all this. And it could be that this committee every year decides whether it's appropriate and there's a reason for having this work done. And it's not just a case, I think, of whether the strategy's changed. It's possible that an existing strategy may be inappropriate, incorrect, and therefore that's where there may be some benefit in having another independent view on the strategy. So I think that sort of approach would give the flexibility that we need without getting ourselves into a situation where we're on a sort of fixed timetable and it has to be done every 2 years.
Thank you. So sorry, do you have some suggested wording we could put to the committee then, or?
So it's on the agenda for every year at a point in the year.
Sue?
And presumably you're making that recommendation to me, because obviously I'm the person that's responsible for treasury management during the year, just to be clear about where that recommendation's going.
And that question would come to audit committee once a year, would it? Or
I'm happy to have the conversation with you each year, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the outcome of that recommendation would result in an independent assessment.
sorry, I had different voices. So that would come to audit committee every year for consideration of what the committee wanted to do, and then you'd take away that recommendation. Is that what I'm understanding?
So committee can have a conversation and they can make a recommendation if they feel there's need, that's something that's been reported to them, whether that's through the monitoring or as part of the Treasury Management strategy update. They feel that something is of concern to them, that they would therefore wish to have an independent review. That recommendation would come to me to consider whether I felt the need for that independent review.
Councillor Isaac.
Yeah, but we've also got to cover the situation, Sue, of the unknown. We may not, as a committee, be aware of any particular issue, but this could operate just as a check mechanism. So we would, I think, it would be incumbent on the committee not to be doing this every year, but it's just a mechanism that's there as a recommendation to you.
Sue.
And again, I would remind the committee that we already pay for a strategy advisors are giving us. So But John, what I would hope you would appreciate that is that as 151 officer, there may be occasions when I come to you and say I'm recommending an independent assessment because actually I'm concerned about X, Y, or Z. So it's a two-way piece of work.
So we haven't had an independent review of this for 2 years? When did KPMG last? So let's be generous and say for 3 years. I think it's probably longer. So I would suggest that we draft something along the lines of what Councillor Isaac has outlined, but that we put a rider in that we want a review in 24-25, which is the coming fiscal year, because we haven't had one for quite some time. Would people support that? Councillor Tustin.
I was just going to ask, Chair, is it worth having a chat with the monitoring officer to check this as a sort of an outside perspective on the sort of the issues about how it all goes with the Constitution and standing orders and all that stuff? So at least ways we'd have that sort of rigour.
I think it's a good point. I think the reference to the monitoring officer was around who appoints them, but Jackie, I think Sue has a view.
So the contract standing orders are going to council for approval with the budget report based on my recommended updates. I haven't changed anything around this particular item, and obviously it's something that Fiona and I are discussing at length, as recently shared with all the group leaders. So of course you have every right to ask Fiona, but I'm obviously the one that's responsible for them.
So do we need to have a vote, or is this committee agreed that we will seek some wording along the lines of Councillor Isaac outlined around an annual decision around the review, but with a review in 24-25 on the basis that we haven't had a second opinion for at least 3 years? I've got a few nods. Are we agreed? Thank you. I'm going to come back to the point about who appoints the independent review. I would just draw your attention to page 46, item 3.3. Is everyone there? The Council has delegated responsibility for the monitoring and scrutiny of its Treasury management practices and activity to the Audit Accounts Committee. Either that statement's wrong, or we have a constitutional conflict with our standing orders. Do people agree or disagree with me? Sue.
So as you're aware, we do bring the monitoring and performance here and identify where we are. We give the committee assurance that we are working within the Treasury management policies and strategies as set by Council. I think that is being undertaken by the committee. That is not in reference to appointing independent advisors to come and provide information on the Treasury management activity.
Thank you, Sue. That's about what you and officers work hard on and bring to us so that we can help carry out our functions of our delegated functions of monitoring and scrutiny. That doesn't silence this committee from making its own decisions about what it thinks is appropriate to carry out proper scrutiny of that. I would like to put a recommendation to Council that in order to carry out our functions properly, we need to be able to appoint that second investment advisor through a selection process that goes before this committee. I may be on my own. I'm happy to be on my own if people disagree. Councillor Faulkner.
No, excuse me, I would disagree on that. If you read the 3.3, it clearly says we're there for monitoring and scrutiny. but I don't think we should stray into what we're discussing about and starting to believe we could make executive decisions on various bits and pieces.
I don't think that's an executive decision personally, but Councillor Tustain was next, and I'll come to Councillor Isaac.
I think, isn't the appointment of these people, that goes into a different panel? Is that right? It doesn't go to panel, just done internally. Yeah, so I think I agree with Councillor Faulkner, because I don't think it's actually for us to do that, because certainly with other recruitment processes it's done outside of these sort of committees, so I think actually that's not quite for us to do here.
Okay, I thought the distinction was that we'd see them make a recommendation and then someone else would make the appointment, but that's fine, Jackie.
I think if I remember, we went through this process to talk about having independent people on the committee, and then that was handed over for the actual processing, the operational side of that outside of the committee, if I recall correctly.
Thank you. Councillor Isaac.
Yeah, I agree with Jackie and Graham. I think that it's not our role to be appointing independent advisors. I have confidence in the Chief Financial Officer. I'm sure she wouldn't appoint any firm that wasn't going to be independent and capable of doing the job properly.
That's fine. I understand that. I just think that this committee needs to be aware that in circumstances where I think the phrase is bad actors, if you don't create proper segregation of duties, which will be a phrase familiar to external and internal auditors, then you do accept that you run that risk. Councillor Tustain.
Thank you, Chair. I do recall last year or so we did have quite a lot of discussion in this committee, I think when Councillor Faulkner was chairing it, around having somebody who had a specialism in property because of the emphasis on property. So that was something else. I don't know whether it's worth revisiting that.
I agree with you, Jackie. I'm not sure how that would fit into, doesn't fit into Treasury Management Strategy. One for another day, I think, but good point, well made. Sure, Sue.
I think I'll just remind committee that when we had this conversation previously, what we were content with is for the committee to have an understanding of what we're going out to tender and what advice and what we're seeking and what activity and information we're seeking to get. I'm, very content for the committee to have input into what we're trying, what we're effectively tendering and going out to procurement for. I'm very happy for committee to feed into that bit of it. What they cannot do is feed into the actual selection process itself.
Are we finished with that point? Great. Any other questions about this paper? Councillor Isaac.
Yeah, I'd be grateful, Sue, if you could just explain. At one point in the report, it says it refers to a fairly significant change in strategy away from money markets, bond funds, and supranational bonds into That's a good question. Yeah.
While John's looking for that, are there any other questions on this paper? Councillor Rattigan.
Obviously, in the environment we're in, where local authorities are going bust because of bad actors, as the chair has already alluded to, has anybody, local authorities, put in greater checks and balances to ensure that 151 officers don't invest in solar panels as they did in Thurrock? Have you had any further advice, either from government or from your own network of 151 finance officers?
That's a great question. Thanks, Ken. Sue.
So clearly, we only operate within the code of practice as set by CITFA, which obviously sets out what is inappropriate and what isn't appropriate in terms of local authority investments. In terms of the appropriate local authority investments, clearly we work with our Treasury advisors, and I would not, obviously, in the monitoring reports you see the kind of the performance and benchmarking, and as you will see that obviously clearly we are outperforming a number of other local authorities. I think their investment decisions are different than ours, obviously clearly because we're not in the same financial position, and most of them are worrying about where they're borrowing, not where they're going to invest. So there is, in terms of, a number of the authorities that are looking at or have declared their Section 114 notices, there are just generally poor practices. It's not about necessarily where they've invested, it's how they've invested and when, and the poor governance around that. So in terms of all local authorities, one of the things we are all doing is just checking ourselves to some extent in terms of, are we at risk of any of these things, which is why it's really, really important that the governance is appropriate around these things. So no, there isn't anything that is standing out. It's just about making sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing in line with the code.
Please,
just if we obviously there's a local authorities are at some point will go through change, whether that's devolution or mayors or whatever. Our residents have built up this money. Let's just be honest about it. Will there be a way to ring fence it for the people of Basingstoke and Dean?
Sue.
I'm afraid I can't answer that question, Ken.
Oh, Richard.
If I could just say something generally about this. I mean, the way local authorities operate financially is governed by their financial regulations, which are reviewed regularly. The financial regulations gives power to the Section 151 officer to do various things. And there's been a lot of noise about Section 114. I don't want you to start me on this because I may never end. I drafted Section 114. And it's now used for an entirely inappropriate purpose, which is to warn people that you're about to go bankrupt. It was actually in support of Directors of Finance and Section 151, so we drafted it all those years ago. But I think that and there have been a great deal of noise about Section 114s. There's actually only been about 6 or 7 issued. And when you look at the issues, and we've been invidious to mention other authorities, but Thurrock and Woking particularly, you can't, obviously, some things have been done which are not in accordance with good financial regulations and good financial governance. But if your financial regulations are strong, they are all there to protect you from these things. And they should never have happened. The 1 or 2 things that have happened should never have happened. But it's been very much a minority of things that have gone wrong, which have caused this, really. And of course, the actual number of authorities that's going for Section 114 is largely down to the fact they just haven't got enough resources, and they didn't, at the time of austerity, they didn't make the right decisions about saving money and cutting back services at that point in time, and then it grew and grew and grew. They found other ways of doing things, a lot of them then invested in commercial property for entirely the wrong reasons and entirely the wrong commercial property, and that's why we've got this combination of real difficulties at this present time, I think.
Just to add, thank you, Richard. I sit on the regional audit committee chairs group. I've only attended one meeting, but a similar question came up. And one of the learnings from that was that I think it was West Berkshire Council, they have their internal auditor report to their monitoring officer, not to the 151 officer. And that was deemed to be quite an important segregation of duties. I don't think that works here like that. I wasn't led to believe it was that unusual, and it does follow proper segregation of duties, in my opinion. Councillor Tustain.
This is one that we haven't talked about at all, and it's about the investment into fossil fuels and things. I remember reading through, I think it might have been in the previous report, but there is sort of talk about obviously ESG, and there is talk about avoiding sort of like, I think, dirty coal and stuff like that. But we don't seem to really be picking up a lot on the whole issues around where our sort of strategy towards investment in things that may well have more fossil fuel things. There's obviously quite a lot of public opinion around this, and whether we should be looking into that in a little bit more depth.
It's a good question, Councillor Tustain. Thank you. There is something about, is it ESOG or something? Was it called? Page 55. Thank you, Sue. Oh yeah. So this is about whether our criteria around our 55, page 55. Oh, sorry. And it talks about the council will give preference to funds managed by investment managers that have signed up as active managers of Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, NZAM, or the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, IIGCC.
Falls within those criteria. So I think we've previously reported to Audit and Accounts Committee that actually all of our investments fall within those ranges.
Councillor Tustain.
So what can you give us I personally don't recall going through all this stuff in the past, so it could be just because I've forgotten. But are we completely clean of sort of fossil fuel investments, or do we have some? Is it just certain areas? What have we actually had a proper look at this level and exactly what this means? And is there something, even if you can point us to, so we could look at it potentially in the future to make sure so we can get that into the public awareness? I think it's very important.
That's a good question, Jackie. I think there's an enormous difficulty in understanding what underlines some of the investments below the investments below the investments, but I'll pass to Sue.
There will be an accounting standard that comes forward eventually, which looks at how we report around all things ESG. That is not likely to impact for some time, because obviously, for example, it's not just about our treasury management investments. If we're buying off a particular supplier, just our normal day-to-day supplying activity, it's far more wide-reaching than that. But I think in terms of our treasury management, I think what we've agreed to in the past is that we would bring it as part of the monitoring update. We have been looking at potential provision of specific ESG monitoring, but what that's established is there's actually not sort of detailed enough information available for us to be able to do something meaningful with that at the current time. So what we are doing is making sure that who we do invest with does actually have an appropriate policy and evidence that they are sticking to that policy. What I couldn't tell you is whether there's any fossil fuel or anything like that. My understanding when we last looked, we weren't aware of any, but obviously we can start to seek to bring as much more detail as we can during the monitoring process.
So I think the relevant section of the strategy is 5.5 on page 63. It says the council will seek to ensure that any fund managers used have their own responsible investment policies or have signed up to widely recognised policies, for example, United Nations Principles of Responsible Investment. Would that be the one? Yeah. Do we need the word seek to in there? That gives us a get out. I think, would it not be better worded as the council will ensure that any fund managers used have their own responsible policies?
Against those social requirements.
I can see some councillors agree with Sue on that. There's either a climate emergency or there isn't. Councillor
Tustain. Thank you, Chair. I think you have to leave seek to in, because otherwise you're implying that the council will ensure that the fund managers are actually doing things as well.
I just think it's part of the due diligence.
Actually, actually, no, maybe you're right, because if they seek to ensure they have their own responsible investment policies, we're not actually enforcing their operational stuff, but we are still saying they've got to have those policies.
I mean, seek to ensure means we asked them and they didn't have it, but we wanted that fund anyway because its returns are good. Whereas will ensure that they have a policy means that we would say no to that fund and find a different one. Richard.
All fund managers have policies on this, and it is open to authorities to ask once a year for a certificate from them of what policies they're actually pursuing. And most local authorities do that, but in the context largely of pension funds, it has to be said. But the same thing can go for investment funds and funds that, like the ones you use. They'll all have a statement, and it would be interesting if you were to ask for that. You could then compare the differences between them.
Is that something that Mark Jow has asked for, Sue?
Mark has been doing a significant piece of work around this, so we can continue to sort of. It's not got to an appropriate point where we've been able to bring it for the monitoring purposes, but happy to bring that in the future.
I think it'd be interesting to see what these certificates look like at some point. Thank you. Councillor Rattigan.
Chair, I'm content with the ongoing work, and seeking to do something doesn't constrain us. And I do think that some of our residents would feel that going too woke might mean we go broke. So I think there's a balance to be had. Our job is to make sure that we can see evidence when we need to, and I think we've highlighted that. And I genuinely think that we are moving in the right direction. Not always at the pace that some people would like, but I think we are doing a decent job of that, monitoring those. And they're doing it to themselves, frankly. All these investment funds are doing it to themselves. If you look at what's on the back of all of these, I mean, I have a family trust, and I get information all of the time on what they're doing to green up their business. So I think we are fine where we are.
Thank you, Councillor Rattigan. Any further questions about these reports? Councillor Isaac.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say I've not been able to find the paragraph where
it is in there somewhere. We'll come across it later.
I did note it down. So can I have another attempt at asking the question?
Certainly, please go ahead.
Financial officer, because I didn't make this up. So I think with the Treasury management, there was a statement somewhere in the report saying that there's a direction of moving away from the money markets, bond funds and supranational bonds into HM Treasury and Treasury bills. That's sort of either is a strategy or it isn't. And if it is a strategy, then I'd like to understand what is behind it.
Both Andrew and I are looking very puzzled at this point. Sorry, Mark.
So I can't give you the answer because I don't know where the paragraph sits, but I can give you the rationale why you might adopt that strategy in both cases. So in a rising interest rate environment, money market funds, which is the principal source of investing for liquidity, they tend to lag by about 2 months the movement in base rate. And when we're having movements of perhaps 0.5% or 0.75% at 6-weekly intervals, the return that you would earn would be relatively low. Investments in treasury bills, short-dated treasury bills, and with the DMADF, the Debt Management Account Deposit Facility, which is run by the Treasury, it's putting money with the government, they react much more quickly to those changes in underlying interest rates. And at the same time, you're potentially reducing credit risk as well. So I think there are two arguments, both about managing interest rate risk and about managing credit risk, that might support that strategy.
Sorry, and
thank you, Mark.
Adam. Sorry, just to add to that as well. I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure where it is in here, John. Either I don't remember that, but what it potentially is referring to, and it will be in the monitoring report that will come next time, is obviously as was alluded to, we look at bonds and how they're performing and whether time to come out, and actually some of that might be that they will get put into as Mark said, those type of short-term treasury bills, as they're generating high return at the moment, while we wait to see what is going to happen with longer term interest rates and bonds and make that decision. But at the moment, they're offering a good return, so that's possibly the balance there. But I'm not sure there's any specific change in policy on that.
Sue?
Yeah, I agree. I don't recall agreeing that there was a specific significant change in policy. It would only be as probably a short-term measure in terms of when we decide where we want to put longer-term investment. But obviously, should you find said paragraph and you want me to answer it, please come back to me.
Thank you, Sue. Councillor Phillimore.
My point's about number 9, training, page 71, and the provision of Treasury workshops. What's happening about those? When are those occurring?
Sue?
So we're currently discussing with Arlene Close potential dates. It should be in advance of one of the audit and account committees this year.
Councillor Phillimore?
Does it have to be Arlene Close, or can we use someone independent?
Well, we pay Arlene Close to do it. So.
You've been big on contracts, but do we have to have Arlene Close doing it?
So that training is about helping you understand the different types of investments. So they are more than well qualified to provide that training.
Happy? Sort of. Any other questions on this paper? I have one, if I may. I've lost the page though because I was looking for Councillor Isaac's elusive supranational bond comment.
Was it the table on page 66, table 3?
I don't know. It was in the Treasury Management Policy. I think it's page 54. I think in these two papers, the policy and the strategy's undergone a few changes. The policy is largely as it has been in prior years. Is that right, Sue?
Yes, it's just updated.
It's just updated for dates, really. And I'd just like the committee to read section 2, in particular section 2.3, because it just seemed to me there that the language might not be quite right. I don't know. So it's on page 54, and it talks about 2.1, the council defines its treasury management activities as, and then 2.2 defines it as the management of the council's borrowing, investments, cash flows, its banking, money market, capital market transactions, the effective control of the risks associated with those activities, and the pursuit of optimum performance consistent with those risks. And 2.3 says the council acknowledges that it is responsible for its treasury management decisions and activities. I read that and I thought that the decisions and the activities are the officers carrying out our policy and our strategy, and that the council is responsible, council and the council chamber, the council members are responsible for the strategy and the policy, and then we delegate that to officers to carry out. I don't know what other people think about that wording and whether it's appropriate or whether we should consider making a recommendation to amend it. Sue.
I think obviously if you read the Constitution, the council is responsible for a number of things, as is Cabinet, but obviously a number of things are delegated to officers. So the ultimate responsibility still sits with the council, but obviously they choose to delegate that to officers to obviously undertake on a day-to-day basis. So I'm happy to add in there if it helps, noting that this is delegated to the Section 151 officer for day-to-day activity.
Or should it say within the context of the agreed policy and strategy delegated to the 151 officer, something like that? I don't really talk about bad actors, but I think Sue does a great job, but I just for the protection of future councils and councillors and so on, I think we just need to be slightly tight with our words sometimes. Councillor Atkin.
On the same paragraph on 2, we have Treasury Management Policy Objectives. I don't know when they were last updated or when, if they are still relevant. So I think I would like a date on that, if that is possible. Just be useful to know. Somebody came in and looked and said, "Oh, hasn't been updated since 2019 or 16 or whatever it is, I think would be useful.
Sue.
Obviously, we take these from the code. So if the code updates, we update them, but this is just purely setting out what the expectations under the code are for each of the responsible bodies. But I can put a date on it.
I had a couple of other questions. One is that the report refers to the advice of to Arlene Close's annual report, in which we scored a 5, 5 and a 3, I think, from memory. It's very useful as an executive summary. I think I might know the answer that's coming, but should that report come to this committee? Can we see that report if we pay for it with public funds? Sue.
Absolutely, but it's included in the monitoring report. So as you were expecting, that's what I was going to say.
That's not what I was expecting you to say. I thought you were going to say it's commercially sensitive. No. Okay, great. Thank you. I did have one other question about where we're benchmarked. I think, page 58, item 1. The government department guidance on local government investments, which requires Treasury management investments to consider security, liquidity, and yield in that order. This phrase, security, liquidity, and yield, came out elsewhere in the paper, and I can't find where it is. It came up in a couple of places actually, but we don't check or benchmark ourselves on it. I mean, we have seen absolute returns on the tables and things earlier. I was just curious why that didn't turn up in our benchmarking list of what we monitor. And I'm thinking the answer to that might be as simple as that's not what the government asks for.
Our security.
Yeah, I'd like to see us add another one, but I'm just trying to work out exactly what the wording would be. And it would, I mean, it comes back to what I've asked for before, which has happened, thank you, which was to move the capital losses or capital gains position to the executive summary of the report that we don't have tonight, but the one that we normally get. But just some sort of measure of absolute return or something that considers the capital position as well as just the yield.
I think we did start to include that in the last monitoring report, but we will certainly look at that again.
Thank you. Right, I think we've done that paper to death. If nobody else has any questions, then are we happy to note that report and to pass those comments that we have made on to council? We agreed?
Yep.
Thank you. Moving on to item 7, draft capital investment strategy for 2024-25. I'm going to ask Sue to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. So as noted in the previous report, the previous report deals with treasury management investment. This particular report refers to 2 specific investment strategies, the capital investment strategy itself and the non-treasury investment strategy. So we have a requirement under the Prudential Code of Practice to make sure we have an annual capital investment strategy, and along with that comes a number of prudential indicators and limits, which looks at our capital expenditure, our affordability, external debt and investments. And obviously we are also, as I said, we're supposed to also have an annual investment strategy for non-treasury investments. So both of these strategies have to be approved by full council at the start of the financial year and published on the council's website. So that's included in this paper. And so where it's appropriate to do so, the prudential indicators contained in the appendices align with the medium-term financial strategy as part of the 2024 budget process. So where I talk about the number, generally the capital programme update, and obviously we're not here this evening to talk about what's in the capital programme update, but it's just those numbers are included here for the purposes of understanding what our capital spending profile looks like. So in terms of, as you've already pointed out, Chair, on page 76, we have the helpful diagram that, links together all the various different aspects of capital investment strategy. What we have here is, so there's a very short introductory report, but it's the 2 annexes that are particularly important. So the capital investment strategy, which starts on page 81, basically, this looks at how capital expenditure, income and financing, along with all types of investment, contribute to the provision of public services, and how the associated risks are managed and the implications for future financial stability. So really, it's just looking at what we're spending, can we actually afford it? What does that mean in terms of the authority's overall financial position? And then obviously included in the strategy, subject to full council approval, are the prudential indicators for the period of the MTFS, which is 24-25 all the way through to 27-28. We have to have an annual minimum revenue provision statement, and that's set out in section 9. And we also need to set, even though we do not have external borrowing or any planned intention to do external borrowing, we still need to have an external borrowing limit and policy around that borrowing. So that's all included in Annex 1, Appendix 1. And then the second element of this report is the, if I can get to it, here somewhere, is the investment strategy non-treasury, and that covers the Many Down infrastructure funding and service-based loans. So they are things that we could have been doing treasury management investment, but we choose to do something else with that funding. And generally that is because it helps us diversify our investments, but also generally gives us a higher rate of return than we would otherwise receive through treasury management activity. And so again, Annex 1 Appendix 2 is the non-treasury other investments that we undertake. Again, nothing significantly changed in those two reports. There's nothing new to add. And I'm happy to take any questions on it.
Councillor Isaac.
Oh.
So, Sue, what this report tells me is that this is a council that is proposing to embark on a very significant capital spend in the years through to 27, 28 and beyond. And we're doing that out of our own resources. We're not borrowing. We're not proposing to borrow. But it does have the effect of reducing our overall cash balances from 124 million currently down to 31.5 million by the time we get to the end of the MTF's period. Now, it may well be that these capital projects are absolutely ones that this council should be investing in, but there's no doubt that it does have a very significant effect on the revenue that we can generate from our treasury funds. Perhaps something in the order, a hit of somewhere around about £3 to £4 million a year, depending on what sort of rate of return we're getting on the money. So, and then there's a question of what happens beyond the period 27-28. You know, what capital projects may still require funding and eat into our what we have left in terms of our cash reserves. So you have the responsibility to make sure that this all happens without accident. Do you feel confident as a chief financial officer that the trajectory that is being proposed here is one that we can sleep well at night over?
Well, there's a question. So I think I would reflect first that the capital funding that we have available, members make decisions about how we spend that particular funding. So in terms of those priorities, that is a member decision in terms of how that is spent. The Section 25 report within the MTFS budget update report does refer to my concerns over the fact that we need to make sure that we are replenishing the use of internal resources to ensure that it doesn't have a significant impact on the long-term revenue position. So that is noted in my statement in the revenue budget report. What I would say And as I said, we're not here to discuss the actual individual capital schemes that are coming forward as part of the capital programme. What we have been asked to do for such significant levels of spending is we've undertaken independent advice from Grant Thornton in terms of what is the cheapest way for us to be able to finance that capital spend, and that is through our own internal borrowing. So we've looked at all the different types of ways in which we could fund the expenditure, so I'm content that we are able to meet the cost of this from internal borrowing. Sufficient statements and intentions have been made. So in the capital strategy report itself, which is a separate report, it's not the investment stuff. It goes to cabinet and then on to council. It's very clear that before we undertake any other significant capital expenditure, we need to replenish the pot, if you like. So capital receipts, seal money, etc., must be utilised until that funding is actually reimbursed. So you're absolutely right, but all of those things are considered, but they are further detailed in the actual budget papers.
Councillor Isaac.
Yeah, thanks. That's a very helpful answer. I suppose that one of the worrying aspects is the extent to which the sort of normal sources of capital receipts may not be there in the future. For instance, Section 106 money, and we're being quite conservative with the small c in relation to what our expectations are in terms of SIL money coming through. So that's where my concerns start to form. Is what is the trajectory beyond 2028? Because we all know the HS2 project tells us this, that you get into big capital projects, and it's very often the case that you end up spending rather more than you originally thought you were going to do at the beginning. So those are the sort of, just as a committee, I think we have a responsibility just to highlight these things. There's one thing that it would be helpful to understand is in Table 3, there's a revenue contribution. It's very modest for 28, and then it jumps to 24 million. What explains that jump?
Which table, John? 85. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ken.
So the current capital programme does not require internal borrowing for the period of the MTFS. The internal borrowing that we would be looking to undertake linked to the capital programme sits outside, so it actually comes into effect in 28-29, which is why you see that jump in terms of us having to put our own funding in to meet the capital programme requirements.
Right, so this is transfer of Treasury Management. Yeah, okay, got you.
Councillor Rattigan was next, and then I'll go to Councillor Tustain.
Thank you. If we move to page 82, 3.3, just to give you a moment to get there, it says improvements to council-owned buildings. Well, that doesn't give me enough detail. How much spend is on operational within our own building, what we use for ourselves, and which is investment into our property fund or portfolio that Martin and the rest run? Because if you're putting 80% into operational, it's not particularly great, but if it's into the investment property, we ought to know, because it will boost our income going forward. So I think I'd like that split down, please.
Sue.
So as previously noted, that is all detailed in the capital programme update report. This is just merely giving a flavour of the sorts of things that we're investing in. The actual capital spend is detailed with all the appropriate notation in the capital programme paper. As I said, we're just lifting and shifting the overall total numbers so you can understand them within the context of this. Yeah.
Councillor Tustain.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. I was looking at table 2 and then reading the following paragraph 5.3, which I believe sort of explains what's in there, and I struggled to make all the numbers match and work it out. Some of the things are quite clear, and I could work out where some of the bits work. I would appreciate if that was made a bit clearer, and if there are any mistakes in there, because I mean, we've got the receipts, the anticipated gross receipt 17.75 million in receipt of the respect of the many downland, and we've got 17.79 in the asset sales, which I wondered if that was that one, for example. And then we've got the new ways to sales council owned vehicles, rolling replacement of 4.14 million, but I could, pulling the loans repaid totaled up to me as 3.79. So I'm not sure if it's just there's bits and pieces. It was just very hard to understand, and a bit of clarity to get into that. That was more about just the report in general, because it was just difficult to navigate. But there was a second question is about the Public Works Loans Board, and I just wondered, now reading through this, it is quite clear. I think therefore if we did need to look at borrowing money, and actually I'm really, although I appreciate that it's spending a lot of money on investment, and I actually applaud the fact, because it has a very good impact on residents, which I think is something we need. But what I wanted to know about this particular point is, would this mean that we'd have to start looking at selling some of our property? And is that the implication here, or what exactly does it mean? What's the implication on us, and is there any risk around this?
Sue.
So just picking up your first point in terms of the sort of formatting activity, again, let me have a look at what we've detailed in the capital report, and if it's more effective to put some of that in here as well, we'll have another look at it. But in terms of the PWLB, I'm assuming it's the issue around the fact that because we're an authority that invests in commercial activity in order to generate an income return, doesn't matter whether you're borrowing for it or not, the PWLB therefore don't give us the preferential rate that they may well otherwise give us. So if we continue to have a property investment strategy, we would not be able to access the PWLD favourable rate. That doesn't mean we have to stop, sell everything off, because actually that's not the case. We have to give a declaration each year that for the following year we have no intention of investing for financial return. But the PWLB is one mechanism for us to go to for borrowing. There are a number of other players in the market which we've started looking at should the occasion arise. So there may well be a discussion at a point in time, depending on what, if any, borrowing looked like, as to whether we wish to cease our property investment strategy.
I can't see any more questions, so if we move to, I think it's note that report, and Sue will, and the wording change, Sue will take that forward in the comments for council. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to item 8, draft annual property plan.
Well, thank you, Chairman. And this is the bit you've all turned up for, because it's obviously the super exciting bit that has much less in the way of bar charts in it. It's very simple. It's very similar to the quarterly update you get in terms of where we are. There's 3 strands of property. I think you've spoken quite a lot about investment property already. We have a property investment strategy. We work that continues as it always does. There has been some progress this year outlined in the report. As with all these things, it can seem to take an eternity to get deals done because they seem to involve a mountain of surveyors and lawyers and different parties of lawyers, so not very fast moving. The second pillar is our operational property. Most of that at the moment coming into focus is at the workshops that we have dotted around the borough that support the delivery of services. There's a programme ongoing to repair and bring them up to speed, making sure they're good places to work and nice places to work, and of course greener too. That can move a little bit quicker, and perhaps the biggest thing was the community centres, where there's been a patchwork quilt of different leases of varying lengths that needed to be somehow brought into line to give those volunteers who operate those community centres a clear steer on what's expected and what support is out there. And that's again a long process because some of those buildings also need some work done to them, but it's a process that's starting. My big gratitude this year for the property team, of course, is whilst so many things seem to move very slowly, they're not generally known as an emergency service. And of course, this year we had RAC turn up in the borough, where they suddenly had to turn into a very different pace and work with the community team to rehouse everybody. So all those groups using the West Side Centre, which was successfully done. So it's been an incredibly busy year. They juggle a lot of things that go slowly, and then suddenly get a curveball thrown in. They have to move fast, and they did so very effectively. So that's it. It's very much not a change significantly on what we've seen before. Very much builds on the work of Councillor Audit, so I'm sure he'll recognise probably half of my introduction is the same as his. But I will add 2 corrections to it. In my introduction, and it's actually repeated I think in the next section, a net income of 18.52. Well, the 18.52 was gross, but it's now actually 19. So if you see net 18.52, I'm sure you all picked up on that already.
Thank you, Councillor James. I just need to point out to people that there is an appendix attached to this paper. It is pink. So if you want to talk about any of the content of that appendix, we will need to go into closed session. I would rather do that at the end, if possible, but just be cognizant of that, please. Councillor Tustin.
It is a question which kind of relates to it, but I won't refer to anything because it's more a generic question. I just wondered if we end up looking to dispose of properties and there potentially may be people who are currently using those properties for, I don't know, small businesses or sports and leisure facilities or something that adds value to the community. Do we look at helping them to find other things, or do we do anything to sort of look after them from that perspective?
I can see Liz moving and I can see Sue moving. I think the answer is yes, Jackie, but we'll see. Liz.
Yes, the answer is yes. We work closely with those organisations to support them in finding other accommodation or looking at other options, really. So yeah, but very much on our mind.
Sir Isaac.
Well, obviously, a very good piece of work here and familiar territory. So you can breathe. You can breathe a sigh of relief, Gavin. The only point I make is that there is reference somewhere here to a number of new developments and refurbishments out of the long leasehold estate, 800,000 square feet altogether. And I suppose it would have been good to know a bit more detail about what those are, actually, because it's good news. The only other question I've got is, have the governance arrangements for dealing with property changed?
Sue?
As we bring the monitoring during the year, we'll be able to disclose further information on some of those other developments that are happening that are commercially sensitive at the current time. And also the governance hasn't changed, so it's still the same.
Any more questions? I have one about the number of anticipated renewals during 24-25. Paragraph 3.7 talks about 28 being anticipated, and then 23 in paragraph 3.8. Are these particularly high numbers, or is that what we normally experience every year, or are they low numbers, or? Liz?
I'd say it's sort of average. It depends. It's obviously cyclical. A lot of them have 5-yearly rent review patterns, and some of those lease renewals. So it tends to be on our direct lets where you get more, where the leases tend to be shorter. So you might, where we've got small industrial estates, so where we are supporting small businesses. But we've got a good team. We've recently recruited as well, so we're up to sort of full capacity in terms of our staff to deal with those, and we also have the option of going out to external consultants if need be.
Thank you. Any other questions from councillors? I have a couple more, if I may. 3.14, I think this might be where I was getting confused about benchmarking and what was in there and what wasn't in the last paper. We benchmark for rental income growth, capital values, fabulous, vacancy rates, collection rates of rent, sustainability rates. Do we not benchmark for yield as well? How does that work? Or are we comfortable with our yield and or is that missed off the list? Or Martin?
The yields as well are done against capital values, which are done every year. So as part of the index, which we benchmark them, that's taken into account, both the income and the...
So yield's taken into account as part of the capital value, is that what you're saying? Or
Yes.
have I misunderstood?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. I'll take your word for it. Thank you. And I had one other thing that I'd like to go to. It's cabinet, this one, isn't it? The recommendations go. So I'm lucky enough to have Hound Mills and Daneshill Estate in my ward. And Hound Mills is populated by some tenants who are assiduously tidy and some who frankly leave loads of trash all over their car park, all over their the side of their buildings, and don't really take street care seriously. And then I get involved with the street care team to try and clear some of it up, and it's on the street or it's on private land, etc. And you know, the nonsense here is that this is our land that they're leasing off of us. Now, I would like to go to Cabinet that we add in something around making sure that our leases are very clear about the standards expected of the land in their custody, in particular the street-facing stuff, and enforcing litter clearance properly on tenants on council-owned sites. I would like to go further and say that if they don't clear it up, the council will come and clear it up, and then we'll send them a bill for it. But I don't know whether our street cleaning team, they gave me some story about mixing commercial waste with public waste, and they had to do it in separate vans, and they couldn't do it, and it was subject to a different tariff, and then they couldn't drop it off at the, I can't remember. But where there's a will, there's a way, and I just think we should, we're doing more with street care as a council, and it would be remiss to overlook this opportunity. Councillor Tustain.
I do believe in my investigations and my nighttime reading of DEFRA reports and things that I think councils can do, or local authorities, I should say, can do stuff around people, for instance, who sell food and things, to make sure they put bins outside and stuff like this. And I think if it's our land, that's the sort of thing we can certainly look at. We've got areas that are owned by other large landowners, such as housing associations, I think, as well, where this is a constant thing. I'm completely behind you on this one.
Thank you, Councillor Tustain. Yeah, Sue.
Happy to take that away, but I don't think it forms part of the annual property plan. It's probably a conversation with our enforcement officers.
Agreed. It would be enforcement if it's in the leases already and we're comfortable with the wording in the leases. If it's not tight enough in the leases, I would like us to review that and just see what else we can do. In particular, the ability to send our cleaner-uppers in and then charge for. I don't know how that works, but you know, whether people have a 24 or 48-hour notice to clean it up or what. But I will leave that with officers to take a look at, and trust that you'll do the right thing. Thank you. I did have one other question, if I may, on governance on page 121. I was just curious why the governance is split there between Audit Committee get decisions reported via the APP monitoring report, and progress on transactions and disposals is reported and monitored by the Capital Programme Board. That could just be my inexperience of the structure of the council still. So.
Yeah, so the actual monitoring of potential capital receipts and how they then feed obviously into future capital spend and investment clearly is an activity for the Capital Programme Board. What this committee is doing is looking at the annual property plan in terms of what might be coming forward. The actual governance around progressing that property activity sits with the Capital Programme Board.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, then I think the committee ready and happy to note the report and put those recommendations through to Cabinet. Thank you. Agreed. Moving on to item 9. This is for me to introduce. This is our viewing of social networking sites report. It is quite a short report. It's the shortest report of the night, which highlights that, well, the table on page 128 highlights the use of our powers to review social networking sites, and I believe that's done in conjunction with the fraud team. That's how that works. I'm always delighted to see some activity on here, but not too much activity. In that we are vigilant, yet we are not intrusive. I'd like to just move that paper. Are the committee happy to note the report? Thank you. Moving on to item 10, which is the Audit and Accounts Work Programme. I'd like to ask Sue if she would just give us a couple of minutes on what's going on with local government audit and some of the announcements from, or some of the considerations that are going through government at the moment, and how that might affect what comes forward for us in the March meeting. I think Richard's already alluded to some of it and may have extra information, but Sue.
Yes, so hopefully the committee are aware that whilst we haven't necessarily found ourselves in this position in the past, a number of local authorities have not had their external audits completed for a number of 151 officers. But in reality, at the end of December, there were 771 outstanding audits to be completed, and that predominantly included all of the 22-23. I think at that point, only 45 out of 467 have been undertaken. Our own auditor has only taken 4 out of all the audits that they've got to undertake. So what we were advised was that they want to draw a line effectively under the position so that we actually start moving forward and actually start having proper audits undertaken again, particularly for some of those councils that may have 2 or 3 years outstanding. And they've set a kind of sort of a stop date of the end of September, at which point the intention is that all councils will be given an opinion of some description, which might be qualified, it might be a disclaimer, depending on the type of audit that's been undertaken. We are awaiting the consultation on that, so that it's twofold. One is in terms of what they intend to do, and the other is around the actual audit practice code in terms of what auditors are required to undertake. We have had discussions with our own auditor, which is EY, and they are undertaking a very limited audit of our 22-23 position, which will involve pretty much nothing more than value for money, going concern and normal management assurances, which has already been provided to them. So whilst they're happy now to start having conversations with us about our 23-24, which is our current audit, we are likely to have a very limited external audit in relation to 22-23. But that is all subject still to the consultation to be undertaken and for that to be ratified by legislation. But the reality is that we will have some form of disclaimed audit opinion for 22-23, and then it will take several cycles effectively to get back to a fully unqualified opinion, because clearly, they're not auditing the closing balances. They've got to do a significant amount of work with our opening balances, and of course, as a local authority, we've changed financial systems in that time as well, so there's an added complication. So Adam and I have actually met with our, we've got new auditors from now going forward, so Maria and Larissa are moving on to other contracts. And, we have sat down and advised them quite stringently that we would, actually think we would benefit from a full audit. Unfortunately, they are not prepared to undertake that activity. However, that would have to be in line with the resultant legislation changes and the requirements under the code. So they are kind of, in all honesty, they're sitting on their hands to some extent in terms of awaiting what that looks like. Yes, you're quite right to then think, if I walk back the audit fee, we would clearly push back to say we're not going to pay a full audit fee if all we're getting is a VFM audit. And that's not just us in isolation, obviously, that's a common response. So we're waiting to see what the consultation says formally, and we will respond, obviously, about how unhappy we are with that, because that doesn't give the assurance that it's meant to give to the public. And in terms of, as 151 officer, it also helps to give me that assurance to give to you that actually what we're undertaking is appropriate on behalf of the council and the use of public funds. So I'm sure there will be a number of pushbacks through the consultation, but it was meant to be out within a couple of weeks, about 4 weeks ago. So we are still waiting for it, but it's just in context, we're not likely to have a full audit 22-23. And therefore we're unlikely to have an audit results report at the March meeting, because of the fact that at that point probably won't have the response to the consultation in terms of what they're taking forward. However, we may well have the audit plan for the 23-24 audit, which will be a full audit.
I just realised the lengths to which Sue has gone there to meet Councillor Fillmore's request for a thinner pack of audit papers. Councillor Fillmore, you did have a question. Was that your question?
No, it was a comment and a note, and unfortunately I can't be with you on the 4th of March, but I do care about my fellow committee members and officers, and I do feel that that agenda is massive for that night.
Point noted, and I think external audit results report 2022-23, Adam's going to check, but we've probably not got that paper coming forward in March, so you can cross that one off. Housing benefits subsidy certification report, I think it speaks for itself. External audit planning report for 23-24, Sue assures me, and in an explanation said that we will be audited for that year. We may have a disclaimed audit, I think is the phrase, which is new territory, and so watch this space on that one. We'll have Paul Gundry will be here with his internal audit progress report, and we'll have the review of the corporate risk register, which is, I think, perhaps one of the most important documents that comes before this committee. We'll have the internal audit plan 24-25, and we'll have the Q3 annual property plan coming forward as well. And we will have the Treasury Management Q3 report. I have said in the past, and this committee said every time, it does want those property and those Treasury Management reports to come forward every quarter. If other members start to feel that the volume of papers is too much, that we could talk about reducing those papers to 6 monthly. I raise it every meeting. I think the committee is still very clear on what its decision is, but it is an option for us. I think the custody of both of those, these words will come back to bite me. I think the custody of both of those two is excellent, and I know that I wanted to thank officers for the amount of work that's gone into all those papers tonight in particular. They were actually pretty hard to reference because everything was called an appendix or a strategy, and so it did take me quite some time to get my head around them. But thank you to officers for that. It's not easy, that volume of stuff in advance. It just leaves the action tracking log. I'll whiz through those. The IFRS 16 is handled in the report tonight. Adam wrote about that. The internal audit progress report, will, as Sue says there, will be presented to Council in February, and we'll get a summary note beforehand. The Island Close training was talked about earlier, and will be coming forward. We have yet to have a date confirmed for UC Valora, the head of IT, to report back to us on the results of his cyber work and his cyber audit, which was obviously important enough that we wanted to hear his views. And then the review of effectiveness, looking at the terms of reference for this committee. Councillor Fillmore, Falconer and I have decided to do that by email, and that is in my to-do list. So if everyone's got any other business, I'll call the meeting closed at 20:50. Sorry, it's quite a long one tonight, but thank you all for your input.